Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this hearing to order and acknowledge that we're in Treaty 1 territory and the home and the traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Ron Merritt. I'll be your chairperson this afternoon. Via Zoom, we'll introduce the panel members. Ms. Faye Bronson and Mr. Robert Balensky. And representing the city of Winnipeg from the assessment department is Mr. Roddy Pontania. Our recording secretary is Jason Robertson. This afternoon, we'll be hearing an application for revision of the assessment roll according to the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we'll limit discussions to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anybody speaking in these matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The board is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it, along with the city administration. We make our decisions based on the evidence provided at this hearing and issue a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decision with respect to the application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, and to court at King's Bench if the matter pertains to application from exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. In respect to the hearing this afternoon, we will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed and each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have. It'll be then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have the opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all evidence about the application is brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket this afternoon. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the public record. This afternoon's hearing consists of items 1 to 7 on our docket. Mr. Robertson, can you please affirm the assessor and swear in Mr. Reimer's testimony? Thank you.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Roddy Pontania.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer, please state your full name. There you are, Reimer. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, DPC.
All right, we'll go straight to the docket. The first item up is number 679 Henderson Highway. This is the KFC. Mr. Pontania, whenever you're ready, you can take us through this property.
Okay, so up next on the docket, we have file 22-3248. The roll number is 0201 008 6100. The address is 679 Henderson Highway. The 2023 assessment has gone out at $1,562,000. And I do have a recommendation to make on this file.
You can proceed with that.
Okay, so if I can guide your attention, I guess just for the panel's sake, we are speaking about the Henderson Highway the Kentucky Fried Chicken at 679 Henderson Highways, just so we're aware of the subject property. Okay, on page 9 of my brief, if you can head your way there, and I'll wait a second for you to get there. There should be an income report in front of you.
Good.
Okay.
Okay,
So we have on file, we have a C0 designation, fast food. We have 2,581 square feet. We have a modeled rent rate of $38.68 per square foot. And then we have model parameters of a 6% vacancy, a 3% expense rate, and an $8 shortfall per square foot rate, which gives us a net operating income of $89,789, which we've then applied a modeled 5.75% cap rate to come up with our original valuation of $1,562,000. After a review of some market data points, it was determined that the rental rates were coming in a little strong for this subject property, in conjunction with looking at the subject property's income and expense mailer information. And as such, we have offered a recommendation. So we now have 2,581 square feet on $34 per square foot for a revised rent rate. So from there, we have a total potential rent of $87,754. We've then applied model parameters of a 6% vacancy, an $8 shortfall, 3% expense, to give us a revised net operating income of $78,775. As well, after a review of the cap rate, it was deemed that the cap rate was coming in a little strong as well on the subject property. And so the cap rate was deemed to have an increase put on, and so we've increased the cap rate to 6.25%. And the revised recommended value that we have in front of us is $1,260,000. $1,260,000.
hi, thank you. Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, my number is a little different. So I am going to, could I ask for a 5-minute adjournment or perhaps 10-minute adjournment?
That is fine with us. So we will adjourn for 10 minutes if you like, or do you need 15?
10 is fine. And Mr. Pontanilla, I'll call you on your landline right away.
All right, we'll call the hearing back to order, and we're dealing with 679 Henderson Highway. Mr. Pontanilla, you have a recommendation, and maybe for the record, you can just refresh that figure for us.
Yep, no problem. So originally we had on file 2,581 square feet at $38.68. That value was revised to $34 per square foot for the rent rate. And then I have a model parameter vacancy allowance of 6%, shortfall $8 per square foot, and another expense at 3%. And then I have a revised net operating income of $78,775, which I've applied a 6.25% cap rate for a revised recommended assessment of $1,260,000.
Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement with that figure?
No, I think we'll need to discuss it a bit further. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Ms. Branston, questions of the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Robert, questions of the assessor?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Pontanilla, you were down to $34 a square foot.
Yep.
And we will hear the appellant or the applicant's testimony, but they have a figure of about 50 cents lower. So
we're almost in agreement on a lot of them. I've taken the time to review his briefs, and some of them we might not be close, some of them we are, but I think we're definitely on the correct path of revising these values, but there might just be some points of contention to discuss, but we're very close on our values.
All right, that's good. Mr. Reimer, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Pontanilla's recommendation, and what this, and you've identified it already. The issue is now distilled to basically two or within a stone's throw of each other on rent, so I'm not really concerned about that at all. We are, though, still, the remaining differences relate to the non-recoverable expenses, which I'll go through one time very briefly with your permission and ask that that be carried forward, and capitalization rate. So the issues boil down to that in this case. if I could ask the board members then briefly, just very briefly, to turn to page 8 of our main submission. So as Mr. Pontini identified, this is the KFC Taco Bell located at 679 Henderson and just at the corner of Henderson and Melbourne Avenue. The on page 15, and I'm not going to dwell on this at all because the rental rates are so very close. We did provide the board with a number of rental comparisons, as you can see on page 15, and I provide that to you for your reference should you wish to do so. At the bottom of page 15, though, there is this is the slight difference in the rent. There was a March 2018 renewal at $33.53 a foot, and that's what we've used. We believe that certainly represents the best indication of the achievable rent at this site. But again, we're within 47 cents of Mr. Pontinillo's suggested rent of $34, so there's not much to choose from between those two values. So then turning to page 17, the difference, as I indicate here, the suggestion that I have is to apply that market or the net rent of $33.53 with a full 5% non-recoverable and a capitalization rate of 7.25 in this case. Now, with that value or with that capitalization, as you can see there, the indicated value is $1,026,000. The reason, Mr. Chairman, for the selection of the higher capitalization rate, and it is considerably higher, it relates to the impacts of the pandemic on the restaurant industry specifically. The restaurant industry was one of two industries that were hit particularly hard, the other, of course, being the hospitality and hotel industries. Could we turn back a few pages to page 13, please? And again, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I propose to just go through this once and then have all that commentary and questions carried forward. So I've made the statement that, in my opinion, certainly, and we believe it's certainly backed up with the data and the circumstances that were known as of the reference date, the restaurant industry had been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. There was a StatsCan article that I referenced and I've attached, if the board chooses to look through it when it's deliberating. The StatsCan article specifically talked about the restaurant industry in Canada and the impacts of the pandemic, and there's a number of very telling statistics. By May of 2020, a few months into the pandemic, employment in that industry had declined nearly 56% from February, with another decline of 29.3% in December. So you can see by that decline, the restaurant industry, indeed, with the number of people employed, that in itself was, there was a huge decline there. GDP in the industry fell 39.5% by March of 2020, and then an additional 40.8% in April. Huge declines, obviously, and that's a function of the pandemic. Forced shutdowns throughout they're starting in 2020, continued through 2020, and also just a decline in the traffic coming through these restaurants. Sales in the industry declined 61% between February and April, and then an additional 18.3% between September and December of 2020 after having some gains that were made in the summer of 2020. So it certainly dropped by way more than half in a very short period of time. There was a little bit of recovery through the summer, but then declined again another 18%. The next bullet, the proportion of food services and drinking places had a decline of 40% or more in revenue in 2020 compared to 2019. So that's the entire year. And the majority of operations stated that they're uncertain of how long they can continue before operating, I should say, before considering closure or bankruptcy. Manitoba operators, I should say, were most likely to see substantial declines in revenue of 40% or more, with nearly half stating, these are Manitoba respondents within the larger survey, stating that they were most likely to see declines at those levels. And the last bullet, and this is again in the article, the majority of food services and drinking places were uncertain of business survival, never mind trying to get back to pre-pandemic, but simply survival, with over half of food services and drinking places in Q1 of 21 being uncertain how much longer they can operate before being forced to close or declare bankruptcy. So obviously with these chain restaurants, it's not as pronounced as the mom and pop shops, but certainly with those declines seen across the board in the restaurant industry, that will absolutely have an impact on the ability of these operations to continue at a minimum in terms of the net rent they're able to pay, and in terms of the decision to to reduce their footprint. That's certainly an increased risk as of the pandemic or as of the reference date. On page 14, there's again another separate chart. It's from Restaurants Canada, and they talked again about employment in the industry. Monthly employment had declined by 50% between March and April, consistent with the Stats Can article. In May of 2020, there were some restrictions that were lifted, but the survey conducted by this organization indicates that most food service businesses might not have enough cash flow to successfully reopen their doors. And by August of 2020, in fact, 10% of the establishments had permanently closed. In February of 21, just prior to the reference date, there were still 319,000 fewer food service jobs, which was a decline of 26% from pre-pandemic levels. So this industry, I'd submit, is one of the two that was the most impacted by the pandemic, and fast food restaurant chains are not immune to this. The chains ultimately have to be able to be viable in an exceptionally unprecedented difficult situation as of the reference date. And with the declining revenues and the clear impacts of the pandemic, that, in our opinion, very much elevates the risk, particularly when you're talking about rental rates that are premium rental rates, as we're talking about in this case. So for those reasons, going back to page 17, we're suggesting a capitalization rate of 7.25%. And I'll very briefly touch on our retail cap study and non-recoverable study. Perhaps I'll start with the capitalization rate study. So, Mr. Chairman, if you might let me know when you are at that document, please.
All right, Kerry.
Thank you very much. So, again, I'm going to be very, very succinct in my comments. I know the board members have heard this many times, and I'm going to focus on actually some of the trends that the very, very sophisticated real estate investors were seeing based on their experience through the early part of 2020 through to late fall of 2020. If I could ask the board members to turn to page 16, actually page 17, please, of the capitalization rate study. And at page 17, there was a survey that Altus had conducted with a large number of very, very sophisticated real estate and real estate managers and investors with very significant portfolios. These are the REITs and the large portfolio owners and such. And we asked them a number of questions. We asked them a set of questions in April of 2020, a couple of months into the pandemic. And then we've had a follow-up survey in November, at which time the pandemic was fully 10 months into that cycle. And there were a number of questions we asked, but for the purposes of our discussion this afternoon, I'm going to focus on a couple of items. And item number one at the top of page 17, the respondents stated certainly that the market rents for most categories of retail properties were expected to decline. And you can see by the market rent forecast in the bar chart there that the declines in most asset categories were fully 90% or more expected market rents or net rental rates to decline going into 2021, with the exception of grocery and food anchored strips. The grocery stores, typically a common theme in the literature, certainly that I reviewed, was that the grocery stores and drugstores were the two categories of asset classes where you had the drugstore anchored or the grocery store anchored properties. Those properties were still impacted, to be certain, but the impacts were less pronounced. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a restaurant industry that was profoundly affected by the pandemic. And certainly those trends and those expectations for declines in market rent, I believe, would have equal, if not more, application with respect to the assets we're talking about this afternoon. If we look at the capitalization rate projections that these sophisticated folks were contemplating at the time, if we go to the bottom of page 18, the bottom of page 18, there's the responses again in a bar chart as to retail top quality assets. The top quality term, these again would be those asset classes that were the least impacted by the pandemic, being the grocery store anchored or drugstore anchored assets. Certainly the restaurant, the fast food chain restaurant industry, and it seems a little, it's not illogical, but when you're talking about these typically very well maintained properties, they physically look like a top quality property, but when we're talking about capitalization rate, it's not the quality of the sticks and bricks that matters, it is the quality of the covenant and the risk in the income stream. So with that in mind, and the impacts of the pandemic that were certainly demonstrated by the materials that I presented, I am still treating these properties as standard quality, notwithstanding what I believe to be a very, very serious risk because of the pandemic. I'm treating them as sort of standard quality, and so the top quality assets, I wouldn't put these in that category because of the nature of the operations. But even with the top quality assets, you can see that the expectation of investors as far as capitalization rate trends, with the November results being the darker bars, the vast majority of the respondents were projecting that the capitalization rates would increase between 25 and 50 basis points, with some respondents also indicating expected increases higher still, between 50 and 100 basis points. There were certainly a few, not many, but there were a few that thought capitalization rates would compress, but they were very much in the minority. If you turn to the top of page 19, then you can see there that for the lower quality assets, the expectation was much gloomier still, with a much higher proportion overall, suggesting that rates would decline between 25 and 100 basis points. So with that in mind, on page 24, we've got a number of properties that we have submitted in our capitalization rate study, and I'll leave them there for the board's reference. The capitalization rate ranges, assuming the inclusion of the full 5% non-recoverable expense allowance, range from 5.92% at the low end up to 8.42% at the high end. The capitalization rate that I'm suggesting, Mr. Chairman, at 7.25% is sort of towards the middle of that indicated range, and that's a reflection of what I believe to be a very much elevated risk for this asset class as of the reference date. If we turn briefly to page 32. On page 32, there's the capitalization rate conclusions based on the market data that we have reviewed, and also based upon the responses that I talked about, the review of the literature relating to the impacts of the pandemic on various asset classes, including restaurants. And as you can see there, with the standard quality, the retail standard quality asset class, assuming the inclusion of the full 5%, the range is between 6.75 and 7.25. I am admittedly at the top end of that range, and that's because of the impact of the pandemic on these operations and the what I'd suggest to be a very high degree of uncertainty as to the viability of these kind of operations on a go forward. At a minimum, certainly not expecting that 100% or even a huge percentage of these chains would close, but what it is going to do, I submit, is it's very much going to result in, recall that I talked about the expectation of the declining market rents, and to the extent that revenues in the restaurant industry were declining by upwards of 50% or more, that is going to certainly have an impact on the ability of landlords to achieve the same market rents. And I'd suggest in many cases that's going to result in an erosion. In this case, we've applied a market rent in the $34 range, which is certainly well within what the pre-pandemic rates were indicating. But with that premium rental rate in place for these properties, that then, when combined with the risk of the pandemic, that would, I'd suggest, mandate the application of a higher rate of 7.25% for these properties. So then, with that in mind, we're asking for the 7.25% to be applied. In this case, the inclusion of the full non-recoverable expense allowance of 5% is part of our valuation. And again, Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I filed the non-recoverable expense study for the purposes of this hearing. It's here in support of our application. I know that the board members have heard that many, many times. I'm happy to answer any questions on it, but I don't actually propose to go through it again. Again, in the interest of time, the only additional comment I'd have, if you recall, Mr. Chairman, and if you want to make a note of the page number references, starting at page 13, I do a quick analysis of the impact of the reduction of the non-recoverable expense from 5% either to 0 or 1%, and the direct impacts on the capitalization rate. The bottom line is that if one reduces the non-recoverable expense allowance from 5% to 1%, which would be consistent with what the assessor's done for the 2023 assessment, by that I mean that the total non-recoverable expense allowance for both what's historically been known as other and what's historically been known as the quote-unquote management expense. So those two combined in the department's materials are at 3%. Our combined request is actually at 7%. So if you reduce the total non-recoverable expenses from the full 7% to 3%, the mathematical effect on capitalization rates that we've analyzed is to increase it by roughly 33 basis points. The reason for that is our capitalization rate sales analysis in each and every case includes the full 5%. So if there is an inverse correlation between the reduction in that expense allowance and the indicated capitalization rate. So if the board is inclined to reduce the non-recoverable expense item, which is certainly within your purview, then please consider our capitalization request to be increased by 25 basis points so that we are being consistent on our approaches with how we've analyzed the data. So subject to any questions, Mr. Chairman, those would be my comments. And again, I'd ask that the cap rate commentary and the non-recoverable commentary be carried forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Patania, questions of Mr. Reimer?
I guess I do have some questions to ask, and while I can appreciate the presentation that Mr. Reimer gave in regards to the challenges that the retail section has been facing in the pandemic, we are speaking specifically about these fast food restaurants, and I think it does merit some time to discuss in particular the fast food subject properties themselves. And so while I do see that we are in agreement on the rent rates or thereabouts, that looks good, we're close on that. Mr. Reimer, so your 7.25% cap rate, so that 7.25, was that chosen as an average cap rate, I guess?
That's chosen as the cap rate that, no, it's not an average. It's at the, Mr. Pontini, it's within I'm categorizing it as a standard quality retail, notwithstanding the concerns I have with the durability of the income stream.
Yep.
And the 725 is at the upper end of that, reflecting what I perceive to be the risk.
Okay, and in regards to the risk of the subject property.
I'm sorry?
In regards to the risk for the subject property, are you aware, if the subject property was closed during the pandemic? Were they closed for any amount of months at all or suffered any sort of pandemic restrictions in their operations?
Absolutely, they did. The mandated government shutdowns throughout 2020, the only operations they were allowed, and at some point, so it was a sort of a moving target. The in-person operations were closed for several months throughout different periods in 2020. The only operations that were permitted to continue would have been the drive-through under
they weren't fully closed, in other words. The drive-throughs were open and able to accept business.
Well, sure, but the drive-through only represents a small component of the total business, Mr. Pontanilla. That's my very point.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that could be one way to characterize. The other way that I would see would be that the mom and pops perhaps suffered more of the consequences due to not having a drive-through extension where they were able to stay afloat. On page 19 of my brief under the COVID questionnaire, it doesn't look like they were closed temporarily due to the public health measures.
Mr. Pontanilla, they actually were closed for in-person dining. I want to be very clear on that. Okay. Through various periods. The drive-through
weren't on their questionnaire, but
Mr. Pontanilla, are you suggesting that they were defying government mandated shutdowns because they weren't?
No, if you look on page 19 of my brief, they do have a space or question number 2 where tenants at this location closed temporarily due to public health measures. They checked off no. So that's why I'm inquiring in regards to that.
Absolutely. For the drive-through remained open, representing that segment.
Okay, so the drive-through is open, so they were able to have business. Are you aware of them accepting any government funding? Did they have to accept any government funding in regards to the closure?
Please repeat that.
Did they accept any government funding in regards to the closure during the pandemic? Are you aware if they accepted any government funding?
They don't indicate it on the questionnaire, but on your page 16, and this is a reflection of what was going on. There was a 6-month deferral in the rent. So there were deferrals, government incentives, and in some cases abatements.
Yep, there were deferrals, and that's definitely was factored into the cap rate adjustment that I took into account. But I want to be clear, because a 7.25%, that's a fairly high cap rate for a fast food restaurant. So I just want to be very clear on the details. I'm not disputing that there were some issues and there were challenges during the pandemic, but we are speaking about fast food restaurants that were open and were able to take business. So that would be my only contention in regards to that. But yeah, so those are really my questions, if they were closed and if they had any government funding. Thank you.
I thank you. The questions of the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank you. Robert, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Summation, either party?
I would actually like to have a few comments and again ask them to carry it forward.
Yeah.
But Mr. Pontinia, I believe, should have the first opportunity should he wish to do so.
So for summation, no, I think that we're fairly close in our rent rate that's being applied. The question does come down to the non-recoverable and the cap rate considerations, and I would argue that because the fast food restaurant was able to accept business and had remained open, even though it wasn't open to dine in, that was factored into the cap rate. But to push it into the sevens, and that would seem to me a little bit high. But that would be my summation. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Reimer?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Because of the inextricable link, I would suggest, between what I talked about, recall, was the projection of the declining rental rates, the fact that at $34 being even higher than what was negotiated pre-pandemic, but the potential for the rent to a significant erosion in the rents in the pandemic environment. I am going to talk very briefly in summation about the rents, because there's a direct connection here. Recall my previous comments that, in my opinion, and I appreciate Mr. Pontania's recommendation with a $34 rent, but that does not in any way capture the risk in my submission, in my respectful submission. Could we turn briefly to page 15? And I just wanted to point out what I believe to be a very cogent example of what I'm talking about. So on page 15 of our materials, as I mentioned, there's quite a number of rental comparisons there. And index number 14, there's a number of these are all, and I should be clear, these are all chain restaurants. There's no mom and pops here. If this was a mom and pop operation, Mr. Chairman, with the number that I am personally aware of that have closed, I would be seeking something, to be clear, much higher than 725. But when I was talking about the erosion in the rent, with these chain restaurants, the index number 14 is one of the significant standalone chains. It's not a McDonald's, but it's a national operator in the same category. This is a lease that was or a renewal that was negotiated in November of 2020. So this is a pandemic lease at an extremely good, and I'd suggest superior location to virtually anything we're talking about this afternoon on Portage Avenue. 2010 building, and the rent is $26.50 a foot. That's a pandemic era rent. So when we're talking about $26.50 being the one rent, the one strong indicator within the pandemic for a top quality chain restaurant, very high profile chain restaurant at an exceptionally good location, $26.50 represents the very best indicator and likely close to the top end of what the trends were showing with the restaurant industry for these kinds of locations. The rest of the leases, they're the wide range. Most of them were negotiated pre-pandemic. But the 2650, now think about that relative to the $34 that we're using, or in my case, 3353, which was also, if you recall, negotiated pre-pandemic. That is a very substantial difference, and it reinforces the view, as these REITs and sophisticated investors and managers had stated, that they expected the erosion. So the risk profile for these kind of assets relative to the rents that we're talking about is substantial. So I'd suggest certainly that the 7.25 rate, for all the reasons I've mentioned, and given that particular indicator, I continue to believe that 7.25 is appropriate. Thank you.
I thank you. Let's go a little further down the street. We'll go to 1460 Henderson Highway. I understand that this is McDonald's, so Mr. Assessor, you can take us through this.
I'm just opening up the files. Just give me 1 second here. All right. Okay. So next up on the docket, we have file 22-1121. The roll number is 0400-173-2300. The address is 1460 Henderson Highway. As mentioned, this is a McDonald's restaurant. The 2023 assessment has gone out at $2,336,000. And I do have a recommendation to make on the file.
Go ahead, Mr.
Okay, so if we go to page, I believe it's 8 of the brief. I might be slightly off, so let me know if you see the income stream in front of you.
Go ahead, Roddy.
Okay, so we do have this designated as a C0 fast food tenant. We do have 3,859 square feet on the income stream at a modeled rental rate of $39.04 per square foot. That does give us a total potential of 150,655, which we've then applied model parameters of a 6% vacancy, 3% expense, and an $8 shortfall per square foot to give us our net operating income of $135,516. We've then applied an overall cap rate of 5.8% to give us the original assessment of $2,336,000. And after a review of the market data points that we had on file, it seemed that the modeled rental rate was coming in a little strong. So we are offering a revised rental rate of $34 for this subject as well. So that's $34 per square foot at 3,859 square feet. That gives us a revised total potential rent of $131,206. We've then applied the 6% vacancy allowance, $8 shortfall per square foot, and 3% other for expense to give us a revised net operating income of $117,781. And then on this subject, we have increased the cap rate from the modeled 5.8% to 6.75%. And the revised value that we're putting forward is $1,745,000. And that's my recommendation. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask, and I'm not asking the board to adjourn, but could I ask that if Mr. Pontier might be put in the waiting room, and I'd like to go to the next room for about 2 minutes, but I'm not asking for an adjournment.
That's fine. Okay. Thank you, Jason. We'll call a hearing back to order. We are dealing with 1460 Henderson Highway. There was a recommendation by the city of Winnipeg for $1 million. I'm
sorry, Mr. Chair, can I actually revise my recommendation after conversation with the agent there?
Yep.
Did you need to summate it all, or can I just continue forward with it?
No, you can give us the new NOI and cap rate and value.
Okay, so the revised rental rate per square foot is $34. 6% vacancy, $8 shortfall, 3% other, revising the operating income of $117,781. And I actually did want to revise my cap rate to 6.5%.
Value?
$1,812,000.
Mr. Reimer, are you going in agreement?
No, we're not.
Okay.
All right, should I continue forward with my presentation then, I guess, or?
Yes, but I think, Roddy, I think that's probably good enough because you've given us all the figures, okay? And
Okay, I
the
wanted to-
value, the
sorry, I
value was
just wanted
1
to,
million.
I just
1
wanted
million
to point,
800. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that it might bear some fruit to just take a look on page 7 of my brief. So if I could have a little bit of a presentation.
All right, you may continue.
Thank you. So if we look on page 2 of my brief, we begin with the subject properties orientation taken from the pad eye view map. So it shows its orientation there in the neighborhood. And then on page 3, I've included an overhead image of the subject property. On page 4, I've included a north-facing view and a west-facing view of the subject property. And then on page 5, I've included some Google Street View images of the subject property so we can clearly see it's the McDonald's on Henderson there. We have received income and expense information, so that's okay there. We do have a subject history sale on the subject from 2001 at $886,896. And I would like to point out on page 7, for my rent comparables, I have included rent comparables of all the fast food lease information that we have on file. And I would like to point out that the rent rates do vary from $33.65 at the lower end, going up to around $44 at the higher end. And then as previously mentioned on the original income stream, we already went over that, so I won't necessarily beleaguer us with that presentation over again. And on the income value summary, since it's changed now, that actually isn't applicable as well, as we now have a revised assessment. And then on page 10, we do have some cap rate information provided to the board. On page 11, we have some Municipal Assessment Act excerpts to provide. And then on page 12, taking us to the end of the brief, we do have these subjects income and expense information. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Reimer, questions of the assessor?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask that the comments and questions from the previous matter just be carried forward?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I have nothing further then.
I thank you. Faye, questions of the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Robert?
No questions, thank you.
Roddy, what brings you down or up, sorry, to the 6.5% cap rate?
Well, it was deemed a review that that at the original modeled rental rate of, or modeled cap rate of 5.8%, it seemed fairly low for the property just based on some market data and some cap rate information that I reviewed. And then as well, we were just factoring in some of the negotiations and conversations that we had been having with the agent to settle some of the files. And then as well, it was mostly just the market data points that just led me to conclude that 5.8 was a little low. It's my opinion that 6.5 for a McDonald's is an acceptable cap rate, but I'll leave that up to the board to decide.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Reimer, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And again, if I could ask that the previous comments and questions be carried forward, and this should then be very brief. If we could then turn to my page 17, please. And for the same reasons I mentioned earlier, we're applying, and this is consistent with the fast food segment of the docket this afternoon. We're applying a market rent of $34, full 5% non-recoverable, and we are, for the reasons we talked about, suggesting the capitalization rate of 7.25. So that leads us then to a value of $1,557,000. Again, recall my previous comments about what I perceive to be the risk, and certainly with the mandated closures, I'd reinforce that the ability of these chains to continue their drive-through operations in no way represents sort of a standard that a business model that's sustainable for them. And that was the situation throughout 2020, throughout the shutdowns that were occurring, and further with the pandemic and the foot traffic generally, the hesitancy of the folks as of the reference date to be going out to these kind of things because of health concerns. It just resulted in a very, very difficult environment that, quite frankly, no one had seen before. So for all those reasons that we've talked about, suggest the value of $1,557,000 based on the valuation set forth on page 17. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Pontanilla, questions of Mr. Reimer?
No questions. Thank you.
I thank you. Ms. Branson,
No
Question?
questions, thank you.
Ms. Berlecki,
No questions, thank you.
either party wants summation?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. I'm okay.
Okay. Let's move further down the street and we'll go to 1475 Henderson Highway. This is the Boston Pizza. Mr. Pontanilla, whenever you're ready.
Chris, you'll note, Mr. Chair, that I am full of recommendations to make today, so I apologize in some ways for that. But
Well, you know something,
when
that
you
is
do
fine.
reviews, when you do reviews and you find stuff that you can adjust, then I feel comfortable offering them.
That's fine. You're doing an excellent job here, so let's proceed.
Okay, thank you. So up next on the docket, we do have file 22-1817. We have a roll number of 0400-725-2695. The address is 1475 Henderson Highway. The 2023 assessment has gone out at $3,903,000. And I do have a recommendation to make on this file as well. And I guess as we're scrolling down to the income stream, I can kill two birds in one stone, as they say, and we can just look at the pictures that I've included of the subject property so we can see that it is the Boston Pizza that we're speaking about. And okay, taking us to page 9 of my brief, I do have the income report in front of you there. So originally we do have a modeled income stream of an A2 high quality restaurant. We do have 6,320 square feet on file at $41.16 per square foot. We do apply the model parameters of the 6% vacancy, the 3% expense, and the $8 shortfall per square foot to give us the modeled net operating income of $234,153. The model has applied a 6% cap rate to the subject, which gives us a revised value, which gives us the original assessment of $3,903,000. So for my recommendation, once again, the target is going to be the rent rate and the cap rate. So for the rent rate, after a review, it was deemed that after looking at the subject's income and expense mailer information and comparing it to the model, it was deemed that the model was coming in a little bit high for the rental rate. So the rental rate was adjusted down to another modeled rental rate of $35.33 per square foot. So we now have 6,320 square feet at $35.33 per square foot to give us a new potential rent of $223,286. And then we do apply a 6% vacancy, an $8 shortfall, and a 3% other for expense to give us a revised net operating income of $200,558. As well, we have increased the cap rate by 0.25% from 6 to 6.25%. And that gives us a revised value to offer as a recommendation of $3,209,000, $3,209,000. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Reimer, in agreement?
No, we'll have to discuss it a little further. We're closer, but still a little bit apart.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I
Ms.
can-
Branson, Ms. Branson, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Robert?
No questions, thank you.
Um, Mr. Pontanilla, there has been some renovations to this property, the exterior.
Yes, that's correct, I believe.
Mhm. So, do you know,
Sorry, did you
I think
characterize
it's
that as a question?
post-reference. I think it's post-reference, but isn't it based on the physical condition as it stands?
It would be based on its physical condition as of 2023, but I guess the economic condition as of April 1st, 2021, from my understanding.
Okay, okay.
If you are asking me about permits, if you just give me 1 second, I did take a quick perusal of it, and I do have some information that I can speak to. Just give me 1 second here to bring it up.
Yeah, be interesting.
Mr. Chairman, to be clear, I haven't had the benefit of reviewing that evidence, but
Yeah, you know what? Maybe if that's the case, then
Okay.
that's fine. I don't
So,
think we really have much to add.
so I won't, okay, I'll withdraw that question.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't really have much to add anyway, so there's no
Okay.
need to
Okay.
believe any points there.
Yeah. Mr. Reimer, your presentation?
thanks, Mr. Chairman. The nature of the discussion is fundamentally the same. So I ask again that those comments be carried forward. If we could turn briefly to page 15. Now, Mr. Pontanilla's recommendation included the net rental rate of $34, which is what we're applying as well. And it also represents, as shown on page 15, the net rent in place as of the reference date. The chart towards the top of page 15, there's some other, these are a different set of rental comparisons now for standalone sit-down restaurants, which the subject is, ranging between $31.19 a foot and $25 a foot. The bottom two are the similar asset, but I suggest that the appropriate range would be would not include those. You would not expect a Boston Pizza to be renting for those kind of rates, but at the top end of the rate is $31.19 a foot. There was a lease in April of 2020, again in context of just the cusp of the start of the pandemic at $31. As I show on page 17, I believe it is, yeah, 17. The request that we're making this afternoon is based on the same $34 rate, full inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable, and for the reasons that we talked about with what we perceive to be the elevated risk, a cap rate of 7.25, and that's then indicating a value of $2,549,000. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Pontanilla, questions of Mr. Reimer?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Faye, any questions of the applicant?
No questions, thanks.
Thank you. Robert?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Reimer, you're using a cap rate of 7.25%.
Indeed.
As the previous property that you've mentioned, also the McDonald's restaurant. Do you feel like the cap rate is warranted in regards to whether it be McDonald's or Boston Pizza?
Well, the distinction that, and Mr. Pontani has pointed out, the distinction between the two types of properties would relate to sort of the drive-through operations and the fact that those two could certainly continue as opposed to purely a sit-down restaurant. However, I believe the risk is elevated across the, for good quality now, mind you, for the good quality chain restaurants. So I haven't made a distinction in my presentation for this property relative to the McDonald's. The sit-down restaurants, again, not having the benefit of obviously the drive-through operations, they'd be more impacted still. But having said that, based on what I've presented in the restaurant industry generally, I am comfortable with the 7.25%. But your question is a fair one. I understand.
I thank you. Summation, either party?
No, thank you.
No summation. I would like to add that we just need to be clear because just for the board's decision-making, while the pandemic did close restaurants, they were allowed to be open for takeout. So we just need to be aware that some of these restaurants did remain open. Thank you.
I thank
I
you.
want to respond to that, if I might. The takeout business at a sit-down restaurant, I'm going to suggest would be completely, a restaurant of this type would not be able to sustain itself for lengthy periods of time with a takeout business. That's just not obviously the way they're designed, not the business model at all. And so, yes, there would be some takeout. It would not be sufficient to sustain an operation like this for any great period of time. Thank you.
And I would
Right,
like to
thank you.
add
Yeah.
to that the pandemic measures only applied for 3 months. So the intention never was to have it continue forward indefinitely. Thank you.
All right. Let's go to another McDonald's, which is at 1475 Regent Avenue West. Mr. Assessor, whenever you're ready. Are you okay, Mr. Pontinia?
Okay, I'm good to go.
Okay,
So next up, we have on the docket, we have file 22-1153. The roll number is 0901-047-3660. The address is 1475 Regent Avenue West. As it was mentioned, this is a McDonald's restaurant that we're speaking of right now. And the 2023 assessment has gone out at $2,779,000. And I do have a recommendation to make on this file as well. And so I enjoyed what I kind of suggested earlier. So as you're scrolling down, if you can just have a quick look at the pictures that you have in front of you, that way we don't have to return to it and you can see the subject property that we're speaking of there. And so taking us to the income page on page 8, we do have the tenant as a C0 fast food tenant at 5,765 square feet. The modeled rental rate for this subject is $31.72 per square foot. So that gives us a total potential of $182,866. We have applied the model parameters of a 6% vacancy, a 3% expense, and an $8 shortfall per square foot to give us a net operating income of $163,970. As well, we do have a modeled cap rate of 5.9% to give us a original valuation of $2,779,000. For the recommendation, I propose that the cap rate be adjusted, but that the modeled rental rate stay the same, as it appears to be a reasonable rental rate for the subject property. So we do have the original modeled rental rate. So we have 5,765 square feet at $31.72 per square foot. And that brings us to our original total potential rent of $182,866. We've applied all the same parameters to come up with the net operating income of $163,970, which we've then applied a 6.25% cap rate up from 5.9%. And that gives us a revised value of $2,624,000. And I believe that is my recommendation on that file. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement?
No, we're not in agreement, but if I might ask the questions and comments from the previous discussion to be carried forward, and that would be the extent of my questioning.
I thank you. Ms. Branson?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Berlinke?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Reimer, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Could we just briefly turn to page 17, please? So page 17, our suggested value this afternoon is 2,325,000. Interestingly enough, in this case, our potential rent and actually our NOI is higher than the department's modeled rent by about, the NOI is higher by, just call it $5,000, just a bit under. We are, though, for the reasons previously discussed, requesting a capitalization rate adjustment to 725, resulting in the value of 2,325,000. And with that, and with the, again, the request to have all the previous discussion carried forward to this property, that would be my presentation.
All right, thank you. Mr. Assessor, questions of the applicant?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Ms. Branson?
No questions, thank you.
I thank you. Robert?
No questions, thank you.
Either what party wants summation?
No, thank you.
I'm okay on summation. Thank you.
All right. Let's go to another KFC, which is at 1651 Region Avenue West. Mr. Assessor, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so up next, we have file 22-3250. The roll number is 0900-776-1000. The address is 1651 Regent Avenue West. The 2023 assessment had gone out at $1,378,000. As mentioned, this was a Kentucky Fried Chicken. And as previously put, I do have a recommendation to make on this file. So as we're heading towards there, we can see the pictures that come in front of us to show us the subject property. And that's the Kentucky Fried Chicken on the corner of, I believe it's Panet Road and Regent Avenue West. Okay, so for the original valuation, we do have the C0 tenant class as a fast food, and we do have 2,673 square feet at $32.46 per square foot, which gives us a modeled total potential rent of $86,766. We've then applied the vacancy model parameters for vacancy at 6%, a 3% expense, and an $8 shortfall per square foot to give us a net operating income of $77,830. The model then applied a 5.65% cap rate on the subject to give us the original valuation of $1,378,000. And for my recommendation, once again, the recommendation is in regards to the cap rate. So the rental rate is going to remain the same at $32.46 per square foot. All the other parameters remain the same. So the same net operating income of $77,830. But I have increased the cap rate from 5.65% to 6.25%. And that gives us a revised value of $1,245,000. Thank you.
Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement?
No, we're not in agreement, but again, same questions and comments from previous if we might carry it forward, and that would be the extent of my questions.
I thank you. Faye, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
I thank you. Robert, any
No
questions?
questions, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Reimer, your presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we go to page 17, please? And this is actually, this case is very similar to the previous one we just had, where our net operating incomes are actually remarkably close. We're using a slightly higher rate, that rate being the March 2018 renewal. So it was prior to the pandemic, but we're applying that rate of $33.65 a square foot from the March 18 renewal and running that through with the full 5% non-recoverable. Our NOI is $77,351. So we're within actually $500 of the department's model-driven NOI in this particular case. We are, for the reasons talked about earlier, suggesting a cap rate of 7.25, resulting in a requested assessment of $1,067,000. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Assessor, questions of Mr. Reimer?
No questions, thank you.
Faye, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Reimer, your presentation? Or did we do it already?
I think we just did.
We just did?
I
Okay.
can go through it again if you want.
Okay, I just got a little mixed up there. Summation, either party?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody need a break?
We're moving fairly quick. I'm willing to continue forward if the rest of the chair is. It's up to that. It's up to you guys.
All right. You guys okay, Robert? Hey?
Yeah. Okay.
Jason, Kerry? All right. Let's proceed. So we'll go to Nairn Avenue, 680 Nairn Avenue, another McDonald's. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Assessor, go ahead.
Okay, so up next we have file 22-1132. We have roll number 1409-388-0000. The address is 680 Nairn Avenue. The 2023 assessment has gone out at $2,293,000. And I do have a recommendation to make on the file. So as we head forward, we can take a look at the pictures of the subject property there, so we can see which McDonald's we're talking about. All right, and then taking us to our income report. So once again, this is all model-driven rates that we have on file in front of you. So we have a C0 fast food designation for the tenant class, 3,662 square feet. We have it at a model given rent rate of $39.67 per square foot to give us a total potential rent of $145,272. We do have a 6% vacancy, a 3% expense, and an $8 per square foot shortfall rate applied to give us a net operating income of $130,701. From there, we have applied a modeled cap rate of 5.7% to give us a valuation of $2,293,000. As previously spoken about, in keeping consistent with some of the other reviews I have, I am putting forward a recommendation now for a revised rental rate of $34 per square foot. So we've reduced the rental rate from $39.67 to $34 per square foot at 3,662 square feet. As well, we have the model parameters of a 6% vacancy, $8 shortfall per square foot, and a 3% expense to give us a revised net operating income of $111,769. And then from there, we've applied a 6.5% cap rate to the subject to give us a revised valuation of $1,720,000. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement?
And not in agreement, but again, ask the questions, comments from earlier matters be carried forward. Thank you.
All right, I thank you. Faye, any questions of the assessor?
I'm not sure I heard the final number. Was it 1,700,000?
Sorry, that was 1,720. 1,720,000.
Thank you. That's all.
Right.
No further questions.
I thank you. Robert, questions?
Yes, one question. I missed the cap rate amount of Mr. Pontier.
Yeah, so the revised cap rate, we moved it up from 5.7 to 6.5% in line with the other McDonald's.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I thank you. Mr. Reimer, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Page 17, please. So actually with the suggested adjustments that Mr. Pontier has presented, our NOI is very close. Mr. Pontinier's revised NOI, I believe, was 111,700, call it a bit higher. Ours is 107,000, as you can see there. So we're within $4,000 of each other. We are requesting, based on the $34 rate and the non-recoverables, we are still suggesting the 107,000. But really, the case revolves around the capitalization rate, and for the reasons we've previously discussed. suggesting 7.25, resulting in the value as shown there of 1,477,000. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Pontonia, questions of Mr. Reimer?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Hey, Faye, any questions of Mr. Reimer?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Reimer, the floor is yours.
Shall I go through it again?
Did you present already, Mr.
I
Reimer?
just did. I can do it again though.
No. I'm making all kinds of notes here and I just, okay.
I apologize. So yeah,
Either party wants summation?
no, thank you.
Okay, let's go to the last one, which is 1212 Nairn Avenue. Mr. Pontonia, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I guess the last item we have on the docket is file number 22-3439. The roll number is 14100043400. The address is 1212 Nairn Avenue. The 2023 assessment had gone out, at $3,610,000. And just to round it off to the bases, I do have a recommendation on this file as well. And so as we're heading forward to the income stream, if I can ask once again for you guys to just take a look at the subject that we're speaking of on the photos that I've included. And this subject was used as a Tony Roma's ribs, but the subject had vacated. From my understanding, it was actually during the pandemic. So this subject did suffer some challenges, definitely during the pandemic as they vacated. My understanding is March 31st, 2020. So as of April 1st, they've been vacant still. So if we can look at page 8 of my brief on the income report, we do have the tenant labeled as an A2 high quality restaurant, 7,034 square feet. We have it at a model driven rental rate of $34.86 per square foot. That does give us $245,205 for the total potential rent being generated by the model. We then have the modeled parameters applied of a 6% vacancy, a 3% expense, and an $8 shortfall per square foot to give us a net operating income of $220,202. We've then applied a modeled cap rate of 6.1% to give us the original valuation of $3,610,000 rounded. For my recommendation, I did take a look and I've made several recommendations due to the challenges that this file is, that the subject is currently facing. So the first recommendation I made was to the rental rate. So we have a $34.86 modeled rental rate. After looking at some market data points and in conjunction with the challenges that the subject was facing, I am putting forward a recommended revised rental rate of $27.50 per square foot. So we now have 7,034 square feet at $27.50 per square foot to give us a revised total potential rent of $193,435. As well as previously alluded to, the subject has been facing some challenges in regards to its tenancy and finding another tenant. So after a review, it was deemed that it was appropriate to make an adjustment to the vacancy. So we have increased the vacancy to 10%. From the model 6%, we now have a 10% vacancy in place. From there, we've included the shortfall per square foot of $8 and the other expense of 3% to give us a revised net operating income of $163,242. And then the final recommended adjustment to the file was to increase the cap rate. So the cap rate was at 6.1% and the recommendation is to increase it to 6.5%. And after all of those adjustments made to the income stream, the final value that we're putting forward is $2,511,000. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Roddy, did you read your cap rate of 7.1 or is it 7.5?
Sorry, 6.1 was the original cap rate.
Oh,
And so
sorry, yes. Okay, sorry
6.1 was
about that.
the modeled cap rate, and then I increased it to 6.5.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Reimer, are you in agreement?
We're not in agreement, but we certainly are much closer. And I don't have, because of the nature of Mr. Pontania's adjustments, it's going to distill to cap rate. So I have no other questions at this time.
I thank you. Faye, any questions of the
No.
assessor?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Robert, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, on his recommendations, could he clarify what the net operating income result was?
Yep. So the first adjustment was 2750 the rent rate. The second adjustment was 10% to the vacancy, and the revised net operating income is $163,242. So 163,242.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Reimer, your presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Page 17, please. So on page 17, actually now, Mr. Pontania's revised suggested NOI is $163,242. So we're now within $7,000 of each other. And I'm going to suggest, Mr. Chairman, the bulk of that is, in fact, I'm sure all of it is due to the differences in the non-recoverable expense allowance that's been applied by the parties. So I'll leave that for the board to consider. And then the remaining issue is cap rate. Now, in this case, as Mr. Pontania was exactly accurate in his statements, and I can confirm that Tony Romas did leave in March of 2020. So as of the reference date, the property had been vacant for just over a year. And that with the risk and with absolutely no interest whatsoever being generated at this site. And so my suggestion relative to the cap rate is at 7.50%, reflecting it's a 25 basis points higher than the rate suggested for the previous properties, and that's reflecting the very, very pronounced lack of demand in securing any tenant for this property. So for that reason, we're applying 7.5%, and the requested value is $2,084,000. Thank you.
I thank you, sir. Mr. Pontania, questions of Mr. Reimer?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
All right. Faye, anything?
No questions.
I thank you. Robert?
No questions, thank you.
Summation, either party?
No, thank you.
I'm okay on summation. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Reimer, I think that concludes your business here. So thank you for your presentations and results very soon. So have a pleasant day and a pleasant weekend.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time.
Okay, Mr. Pontania, thank you for your presentations and have a good weekend. We have heard all the items scheduled. This hearing is now adjourned. I thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.